imposter syndrome similar to an emotion like any emotion you would have that's unwanted, like anxiety or something like that. You can't get rid of emotions, they happen. You can't get rid of imposter syndrome, it kind of happens.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Career Therapy Podcast. My name is Martin McGovern, and I want to introduce you to Mo Goltz today. He is a UX researcher, design strategist at Extra UX, and he's also a student or former student of mine. Mo, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you today about imposter syndrome. It was something that we talked a lot about in our coaching sessions together, and it's something that I know you're very passionate about. And
Yes.
You have gone through quite the journey and come out the other side successful with many offers and a lot of great stuff going on. But I'll pause there and let you introduce yourself and tell us what you've got going on.
Yeah. So basically, my name is Mo Goltz. And so I do UX research. So I help companies understand their users better to form a competitive advantage and design better apps and websites. And design research and strategy kind of bridges the research to the design through strategy to help actually make apps and websites that are useful as well as easy to use. And basically, ever since grad school ended and I graduated, I think I felt like an imposter in tech. And I've always heard that everyone else feels the same way, but I never really believed it until recently. And I've recently, within the last couple of months, developed a new relationship to this feeling. In my opinion, it's basically similar to an emotion. Imposter syndrome, similar to an emotion like any emotion you would have that's unwanted, like anxiety or something like that. You can't get rid of emotions, they happen. You can't get rid of imposter syndrome, it kind of happens. And so how do we relate to it differently is kind of where I'm at now, and how I've come to thrive in my career versus just kind of survive, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely know that well. You know, I've grown up with an anxiety disorder. And so
Oh, really?
it never goes away. It's always there. But the question is, what happens when it flares up in a way, right? And
Exactly.
so,
And yeah.
what were you
And how do you
saying?
catch it? And how do you catch it when it's a match before it's a forest fire and it'll flare up? But how can you act proactively so that it's easier and faster to deal with?
Exactly. And so bring us all the way back to the beginning. When, you know, you said early on in tech, that's when it started hitting you.
Yeah.
Was it in school, before school, after school? When did you start feeling
I
this way?
felt I felt invincible in school because it was a very validating, supportive environment. And as long as you tried really hard and you showed that you cared and put effort in, like I felt like I was successful. But it's so weird because no one traditionally goes in a straight line to get into tech. So I mean, I went through graphic design and psychology, but in order to be in tech, unless you're just totally like pigeonholed and you're myopic in what you want to do, which is totally possible. Where like if you just want to do engineering, all you know is engineering. But in design, you have to know a little bit about technology. You have to know a little bit about business, psychology, anthropology, sociology, all these things that I could go on, that you have to be like a Renaissance person. And it's impossible to say, oh, I know everything, because the field is constantly evolving, but also no one's like, up until recently, there wasn't any undergraduate education in this field. And now there's beginning to be undergraduate education, but even then it gets even worse because the imposter syndrome can now start earlier. like, and so I think there's a level of expectation that has been created somehow through society, like Silicon Valley, like the HBO TV show is not that much of an exaggeration, just like Portlandia isn't that much of
Yeah.
an exaggeration. And it's just crazy. So imagine trying to be an actor or actress in LA. Well, I was living in San Francisco after graduating, and it doesn't matter how good you are at what you do or how good you feel about what you're doing. there's someone younger than you, smarter than you, that invites you to, that's very nice to you and invites you to their yacht party because they have 3 yachts. And I'm just like, it's not about money. It's just like they are successful and they seem so confident that you're like, if I could be a third as confident as they are, then I'd be a lucky man, you know?
And you mentioned that you noticed that, so many people have it as well. It's not just like everyone almost feels like they're the only one that's going through it. This happens with anxiety, this happens with depression, this happens with everything. It's like I'm the only one going through this, and we get very focused on our experience. But, one of the benefits of being a career coach is that I see that everyone is like struggling in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you have your career together, but your relationship isn't great. Maybe you have your relationship together, but your career isn't great. Maybe you have, any number of different things that are pressing on you, or bad parents, or whatever the thing might be. And so I'm curious, in your view, do you still feel like it's kind of, something that you're going through? Do you notice that it's like you're not alone in this? What's been your experience?
So I now believe in my heart that people also experience it. I always knew in my head that people experienced it, but you have to kind of believe in your heart and your head for it to click. I feel like it's a chronic condition that flares up. And right now, I'm really grateful to be in a period where it's not flaring up, but I know that within the next month or so, it's probably going to flare up. I have certain things coming up in my professional life. But because I relate to this feeling, this condition, this whatever syndrome, whatever you want to call it, I relate to it differently. I'm not afraid of it anymore. So like the way I think about it is kind of funny. I think about this in the shower. I have all these shower thoughts. So in Jurassic Park, Chris Pratt's character is in charge of the velociraptors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna kind of reenact this for a second. So he has like the velociraptor coming and he like stares at it and he's like, whoa. So you have to like be aware that the imposter syndrome is there and is really dangerous and it can't kill you, but it can feel like it can kill you. And you have to like look it in the eyes and like stare it down and be like, I know what you want. I know what you're trying to do. And really, ultimately, imposter syndrome is just your defense mechanisms trying to protect you from getting caught as a fraud.
Right.
And despite you having accolades and accomplishments and that kind of thing. So to me, oh my goodness, I discovered imposter syndrome maybe in 2017 or 18. And once I had a label for it and I knew that other people had it, because if someone else is talking about it, and actually somebody wrote a book on it. So what ended up happening was Valerie Young wrote a book called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. And this guy named Stephen Gates, known as the Crazy One, did a podcast on the book. Once I discovered them, and I actually spoke to both of them in addition to teaching classes and courses about imposter syndrome.
Oh, wow.
And so supposedly I'm an expert on it, but I feel like an imposter on imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Like, what do
I mean, why not?
know?
Why not add that to the list?
So, and it didn't mean that I got rid of it. And it didn't mean like I tried to get rid of it by teaching about it. And I think it helped people, but it didn't help me because by teaching it to other people, I was trying to control it. And really, I wasn't changing how I related to it. And what I realized was I was feeding into it by doing the same things that I was doing my whole career, but doing it harder. And once I stopped feeding it so like there's 4 or 5 different kinds of imposter syndrome. And like mine is basically like the expert. I need to know everything about everything. So I literally have a digital library that's like 2 terabytes large right now. I have to have external SSDs to keep track of all the resources in UX that I could ever have. And I thought if I just filled it up, that I'd get rid of the imposter syndrome. Well, it turns out you can't fill it up. And second of all, there's something called hoarding that OCD people do. And I was digitally hoarding. And basically what I realized is I need to go from hoarding to just in time learning. So if I get a project where there's this thing that I've never done, I have to trust myself enough to know I'm a quick learner and I know how to ask for help and I know how to tell people that I've never done this before, but I can certainly try and do my best. And once I realized that I could do just in time learning and tell people that I'm not, look, no one's Superman. They can't just magically know everything. And if we could, then, tell me how, but
But I like the way you put it, right? You knew it rationally, but you didn't have it emotionally yet. And I think that that's something that happens in a lot of areas of life as well as in our careers. Um, I know rationally I should be doing a certain thing, or I know rationally I should be working out more or eating better or whatever. But
yeah,
until it gets down into the like core emotions or in our nervous system, it really doesn't change. And I think being intellectually maybe driven, I know I'm definitely more of a thinker than like a physical person. And so a lot of people, they live in their body, a lot of people live in their head. And so what were the things that maybe helped you go from the head to
yeah.
like living it?
So I want to tell you that it was like something that I like did over time and practiced, but it actually ended up being this one thing that I did that did not expect to have the impact on me that it had. So look at me. I had a graduate degree in design thinking and design strategy, and I felt like such an imposter that I took a class online on UX research. Like I
Hmm.
had taught this to people.
Right.
I had been doing it for 8 years, but I need to take a class in it because I don't know anything. So I took this class called Ask Like a Pro, and it was hosted by this company called Curiosity Tank that's run by Michelle Rosnan. And she is such a warm teacher. And Michelle, her like slogan is basically like practice plus guidance equals confidence. And she
Mhm.
basically creates a learning environment where you come out more confident. So most people can tell you that you'll learn something new and different and better. And she helped me with that. Actually, I learned, even though I had a graduate degree in it, I got her perspective from it. But really what it came down to is at the end of the course, I booked time with her and I said, give it to me straight. What can I do better? And how can I be like, I didn't say it like this, but I was like, how can I stop being a fraud? Like, whatever.
Yeah.
And she's like, actually, you probably need to be less chummy with people when you interview. So be a little bit more professional. And then also, there was some other little thing. And that was like the main pieces of feedback. And I was expecting her to be like, you don't know the fundamentals. You did blah, 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 blah. And then like, all of a sudden, I realized like, wow, this person who I'm literally paying to constructively give me feedback is giving me like 3 or 4 pieces of feedback, but ultimately they weren't like these soul crushing things that I was prepared for. And it's almost like I wanted her to tell me I was horrible because it feeds into this story that I'm telling myself.
Hmm.
And once I realized that A, I did something in her class, A, I was proud of, and B, she was proud of, and C, actually turned into some freelance work because she liked it so much.
Which is
And I was like,
awesome.
it's not in her vested interest to blow smoke up my butt.
Right.
And she's like, in my opinion, one of the leaders in the field of UX research education. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, sorry for cursing, but it's just
No, go
like,
for it.
oh, eureka moment. Whereas, like, if she doesn't think I'm a fraud, and then I was also seeing a career coach separate from you, actually, that was specifically for UX. So I had two,
Right.
I was such an imposter. I had two career coaches. Um, and he's like, Mo, you know this stuff, and it's not as hard as you make it out to be. And between seeing this other guy, going to this class, all at the same time, I was like, I'm doing so much. But I don't need to be doing so much anymore. And maybe I never did. And once I realized that I had imposter syndrome, and once I dealt with it through this class, it felt like, when you're going through like a 12-step program, you're supposed to say you're sorry to people.
Hmm.
I didn't say I was sorry to people, but I called them and I'm like, you know what? Remember that awkward time when I was freaking out on this project or something? And they're like, no, actually, I don't remember that. And actually, I don't think you freaked out. But in my mind, I was like
Right.
trying to apologize for like being an imposter or something. And they're like, you rocked that. And then through that, I was like, wow, people throughout my entire career saw me differently and saw me as an expert. And really, I was the only one the entire time that thought this. And this all happened during COVID, all of this stuff. And it was like a phoenix rising from the ashes
That's awesome,
kind of
man.
thing, you know?
Well, and I'm really proud of that journey because, like, there's this idea I think in Zen where, if someone believes something, it doesn't help to try and convince them the opposite. So if someone has imposter
Oh, totally.
syndrome and I sit there and I start to say, no, you don't, you're not an imposter, stop having imposter syndrome. Like, if I just keep telling them that they're wrong for having imposter syndrome, they're going to have more imposter syndrome because you're reinforcing the fact that they're wrong.
Mhm.
And
Ah,
so
yes.
this idea in Zen is to say, if someone believes something, you have to encourage them to believe it fully, all the way to the farthest
Oh,
point of belief. And so
yeah.
what you did was you said, I believe this. And because I believe this, I need two coaches and this other course, right? And then it was going through that excess, like going way too far probably, or maybe just far enough, I don't know. But by going through the process of trying to overcorrect, you found you didn't even need to correct as far as you did. And so
Yeah.
I think that that's one of those things where it's like, if someone feels anxious, to just tell them, well, what's there to be anxious about? It doesn't
Yeah,
reduce their anxiety.
exactly.
It makes them feel stupid for being anxious. And so what we need to do instead is say, okay, if you think you have anxiety, what are the 100 things that you probably need to do to overcome the anxiety? And then at some point in that process, they're gonna be like, why am I doing all these things? My anxiety is not even that bad.
Yeah.
And then you
And
go back to normal.
what I like about what you said twofold. One, not many people know about Zen Buddhism. And in my little understanding that I have, Zen Buddhism was designed to help samurai warriors deal with possibly dying on the battlefield,
Mm-hmm.
and anxiety and imposter syndrome kind of make you feel like you're gonna die.
Yeah.
It's really dangerous, and it's
And even
based
if
in our
it's not a literal death, it's a reputation death or
oh your ego,
ego
the
death.
death of
Yeah.
ego, and that's a real death in my opinion. It just like the death of if you break up, it's the death of what could have been between somebody,
Right.
and so that's what I like about that. And then also something that you mentioned is that you can't tell people to stop having it because like it's an emotional thing, it's not a rational thing.
Yeah.
And our I study this as a human-centered designer who studies psychology, that our decisions are made emotionally, but often in our society we're conditioned not to deal in the realm of emotions. We're
Right.
trained to deal in the rational mind. But in what I've learned through dialectical behavioral therapy is you have the rational mind and you have the emotional mind, and together, when you use both, do you have like the Venn diagram of the wise mind. So it really takes both, but you have to start, I believe, with the emotional part. And I was not ready to be open to being persuaded that I was wrong until I was relaxed. And what Michelle did is she created a safe learning environment where I could fail forward and learn.
Mm-hmm.
And in the work environment, I think most managers, most companies talk about it, but they don't really create a safe
No.
environment. School or classes are safer. As a aspiring manager and thought leader and leader, I want to address this explicitly and make places that I work through my leadership and through showcasing it through my behavior itself, to make it a safe emotional environment, because I think that's the only way people can actually, we're all humans, we're all trying to work together as humans, but we don't treat each other as humans, we treat each other as colleagues. It's like this fancy word, like we're just people.
Well, and so talk a little bit more about that work environment because I think that's an interesting one because so many people are at startups or at companies, and I'm always a proponent of the we're not actually family
Yeah,
mindset. Like,
exactly.
my family wouldn't fire me if the budget's changed. So
Exactly.
um, I do find that to be so interesting because it creates these weird dynamics, and it's like you have a partially colleague dynamic, a partially friendship dynamic, a partially like someone's saying they're your family member, but then also they're like trying to one up you and like
Yeah.
get your role. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your experiences in the workplace and how maybe your perception of it has evolved as you've kind of come to terms with imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I'm really fortunate in that as a UX researcher and strategist, that particular niche is extremely collaborative. And as opposed to other types of tech, I think a lot more diverse and inclusive. In fact, there's probably more female professionals than I experience in other disciplines. And I think it's really good to have that diversity of thought and people bringing their own history and story and perspective, because it's really implied explicitly and implicitly that like we all have a different way to add value and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. And I prefer collaboration over competition. I prefer to compete against myself and collaborate with others, just as my personal energy. But it also is a complementary skill to have collaboration in my field. So I can't speak to other disciplines because I haven't experienced them. I mean, I've done design, I've done research, I've done strategy, but I've never done engineering, I've never done product management. So I can only speak to my own experiences, even though I know I've heard certain things about other disciplines. And so to me, what's really been a game changer is just not making a big deal out of all this stuff. It's like, hey, I have imposter syndrome. I'm dealing with it. And I can succinctly, calmly discuss it with somebody. And as long as it's done in a calm, succinct way, I think it can be handled really well in the workplace. You have to get to a point I had to get to a point with therapy and with coaching to work through my story and my angst in order to not freak other people out in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I freak people out, but I was always afraid that I would.
Well, and one of the hard points about getting to that place is the worry of pausing or slowing down or taking a step back. And I find that that is the momentum that prevents people from ever going to therapy or stopping to consider if they're going in the right direction, right? One of the most interesting things about COVID layoffs is so many people have come to me and been like, I got laid off, but I couldn't be happier because I've been
Yeah.
waiting for someone else to make this decision for me. And that to me is always fascinating because it's almost like if you don't stop yourself at some point, the world will stop you and make you reconsider things. Now,
Yeah.
it's obviously not universal, but the idea that like we can keep going and keep going and keep going and never address these things. Like a lot of people will go through their whole career and never address these feelings. They'll just be manic in their job. Whereas,
Really good way to put it.
well, and I've definitely had a manager like that. And I look back at that and I go, I was angry at the time, but I almost like feel like empathy or like wish she would have just like gone to see someone and like talk about things so that, she didn't have to go through all that. And so when you think about it from that perspective, what happened that allowed you to be able to slow down and think about this stuff?
Well, first, I'd like to address the term slow down because there's long term and there's short term.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, in most things in life, in order to have long term success, to be faster at that, you have to slow down in the short term. So I'm a type A personality. I'd like to call myself a lowercase a because I'm a little softer than maybe the stereotype is, but I like to have a busy schedule. I like to juggle a lot. I like to have my different personal, interpersonal, professional worlds full of different communities and things and projects. And I have lists about my lists of things I want to do. But when I don't leave time to relax and slow down, I find that I burn out. And it's kind of like, as cliched as it is, it's kind of like the tortoise and the hare kind of thing. It's like you're not going to win the marathon if you treat it like a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same could be said is you're not going to win at your career if you treat it like a job. And really, Martin, working with you, I've translated my thinking from job mentality to career mentality. And there's been many other resources and people in my life that have tried to I've tried to get to that point, but you can't really get there till you're ready,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't force it. It's like that story of like a person walks down a street and they fall down like a hole, and then the next time they notice the hole but they still walk in it, and then afterwards they like walk alongside the hole, and then the next time they just take another route. And
Right.
so you have to keep on repeating the same mistake of not slowing down, speeding up, and working harder, not smarter, and keep on doing that, boom, 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 until you hit your head against the wall, and the wall is bloodied, and you're like, you know what? I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I know I can't do this. And you surrender, you accept that you don't have the answers, and that what you've been doing all this time is absolutely crazy. You're nuts because you've been trying the same thing and it's not no different results. And it's sad and it's painful. You have to admit you're wrong. And I admitted that I had no idea. I mean, I wasn't an imposter, but I didn't know what I was doing to get out of that loop of
Yeah.
feeling like an imposter.
Yeah. And one, you brought up AA, and there's a reading that I just read from a Stoic thing this morning, which was talking about, yeah, I love Stoicism. And they were talking about surrendering, right? Like, I think it's a second step in AA where it says surrender to a higher power. And most of the time people use God for that, but it doesn't have to be God. It just has to not be you. And the quote in it, I actually got it right here. Let's pull it up. The quote in it says, you don't have to believe that there is a God directing the universe. You just need to stop believing that you are the director. And
it's so painful to admit that you don't have control. It's like, and part of the serenity prayer, I think, is like granting me the ability to know the difference between things I can and can't control.
exactly.
And there's this book, Death of the Ego, or something like that. It's all about stoicism, and we're not at the center of the universe. And actually, now that I'm helping, this is part of me helping other people, is by talking about it openly in public and in this venue of the podcast. Is it's not about me anymore. It's about me helping people. And I channel my negative energy into positive energy, because the thing that will literally and figuratively like transform all of this stuff is when we make it about helping each other in community. So what does community mean? It can mean many things, but we always talk about like our industry, we're helping each other. We have Slack groups, we have Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, all these things. When you show up repeatedly in the same group of people with the same intentions and you give, you can become part of a community only when you give, not when you receive. And I'm trying to give back because other people helped me. And also, I'm selfishly helping people, because only when I take the attention off myself do I find happiness and fulfillment. And in a certain way, it's altruistic. In a certain way, it's selfish, but it's selfish in a benign or helpful way. So I admit that there's reasons that I'm doing this, but I think they're great reasons, because one of the biggest pieces of advice that both Stephen Gates and Sarah Doody give is, do not do this in isolation. Do not suffer alone. You need to be open with at first one other person who you trust professionally, and then you need to open it up. And when you do, you'll realize everyone in the room has like the same issues. Even like Jimi Hendrix had anxiety before performing. Gold medalists that do diving have fear of heights. Like, you can look up all of these things. I believe it was like even Beyoncé has like certain issues. I mean, Beyonce. Oh,
Yeah.
like, whoa.
Yeah,
So
I think the lead singer of Maroon 5 used to have his back to the audience when he started because he was so scared. He had such bad stage fright.
And even the Beatles were afraid when they first started. rehearsing and performing at this one like hole in the wall venue in England or I think. And so yeah, it's part of being human. And when you fight trying to be human, you fail every time because you're human.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're human. Like if you're not human, then
Right. Well, if you're not
we have
human,
another
then why are you
discussion.
listening to this podcast? But
Why are you?
there's
I'm
yeah,
a robot.
I'm
Yeah.
just a robot translating these words. So there's an interesting thing in there, which I'm kind of curious what your perspectives are on this. I've been noticing it more and more, and I'm getting, I guess, more and more viscerally. I've more and more visceral reactions to it. But like the positivity porn that is, or the toxic positivity that exists online, in regards to a lot of these types of things. So when it comes to the Beatles had anxiety, or when it comes to Beyonce had anxiety, we hear that, right? And we go, okay, but, and then they also made millions of dollars, right? And I think that there's this weird thing that happens whenever we talk about overcoming imposter syndrome or overcoming anxiety or creating content online or whatever the thing might be. The formula seems to be, I used to fail at everything. Then I started posting on the internet and sharing my thoughts on things. Then I became a millionaire, and now I'm like saving the world. And I feel like that narrative is so widely spread that it ends up paralyzing people who are just trying to deal with the day-to-day imposter syndrome and anxiety, where it's like, I not only have to overcome my imposter syndrome, I also have to then become a millionaire and then save the universe. And then like it almost like stacks up too much. It's like, oh, I not only have to overcome my imposter syndrome or my anxiety, I have to become Beyonce. And everyone says, well, Beyonce only has 24 hours in the day. So what are you doing with your time? So,
Yeah. Oh, that
all
makes
that
sense.
kind of
Okay.
stuff. So I'm kind of curious, do you feel, what are your thoughts on that type of message and that type of, on how it might impact people's ability to move through these
Yeah.
ideas?
I never heard of the term toxic positivity before, but now that you describe it, like I totally have seen that. Um, the secret to all of this is that Beyonce still fails. And when someone fails, they learn, hopefully. And when they learn, they can do it again and they can iterate. And iteration is the key to design success. Iteration is the key to life success. And I don't think there has to be this end result or outcome where you make millions of dollars. It's more likely to happen that you will be successful if you don't get your feelings hurt when you fail, and you don't get your feelings hurt when you iterate, and you just accept it as part of the process. And when you iterate, you get better. And like, so like, let's take Beyonce, for example. She's famous for having this like crazy archive of everything she's ever done, and she rewatches her stuff and she critiques herself more harshly than other people. I didn't realize I knew so much about Beyonce until this podcast, by the way. But there's also this documentary, I think, Becoming Beyonce or something like that. I probably need to watch. But anyways, um, if you get your ego out of the game and you just realize like I need to screw up more, not less, and I need to basically change how look. I tell so like on the side, I've done in the past and recently I've done some like coaching myself, and I kind of tell people you have to play the game in a way where you're able to play it long term. So whether the game is dating, whether the game is employment, you have to keep your skin in the game. You have to keep on playing. It's a game. It should be fun. You should be enjoying it. And when you enjoy it, like, why did I get into design in the first place? I didn't do it when I was a kid because I wanted to make money and make billions. I wanted to learn Photoshop so I could create a t-shirt and be like, have fun and cool t-shirts. Like,
Right.
I still want to do that. So how can you get back to like the joy and the play? And when you're playing and you're trying to get better at a sport, you don't beat yourself up for not scoring a home run. You're like, oh my goodness, I get to play with my friends, and you end up getting better because you practice. And it's all about iteration and practice. They talk about mindfulness practice. There should be a mindful way of having practice in your work life.
Right. Well, and I
essentially.
even think the practice thing gets kind of messed up in the way that we talk about it these days too, because we're like, you should practice and you should make it a daily practice and you should track your daily practice. And like, and now all of a sudden, like this just happened to me recently. I was like, oh, I like yoga. I want to do more yoga. And I was doing it like 2 or 3 times a week. And then I was like, I should do it every day and track it. And I put it into an app and I go, I should add other things that I should track every single day to this app. And then I
It's
had
the
like
give.
Yep. And then I had so many things in there that and then I would like miss a day and I would beat myself up for it. And then I realized, wait a second, I am actually more interested now in tracking than I am
Yeah,
yoga.
yeah, you lost the purpose of the
Yeah.
original thing.
And
Yeah.
like, and
So
so, yeah, that whole thing of like taking 10 steps back and being like, why am I even doing this? Like, is there even a core thing that I enjoy? That's so huge. I appreciate you bringing that up.
I like that you brought that up because it goes back to Zen Buddhism and Buddhism in general. You have the lenient way, you have the like extreme, like the extreme negative, the extreme positive. You have being lenient and being stringent. And literally, Buddhism says the path to enlightenment is that middle way in the middle. So you're balancing tracking what you're doing and doing it every day and like taking breaks and reminding yourself why you're doing it in the first place so that the tracking doesn't supplant the original reason. Like, I don't know, Martin, why did you want to do yoga? Why did you like it enough to want to do it more than once and try it the first time and never do it again in your life? And I mean, no, literally, like, why is that? Why did you
Yeah,
want to do yoga?
it was calming, I think, when I'm stressed out, it calms me down, and so keeping that in mind of like, oh wait, I like to do this because it's calming, is important because then I realize, wait a second, if I turn this into something I'm tracking, it's no longer calming. It is, it is like tracking it ruins the calming aspect of it, and so I actually need to not track it and find other
Yeah.
motivations. Um, and so yeah, that is the thing where it's like, I think we can turn self-help into something that is not productive. I think we can turn a lot of these things in sort of flip them upside down because of the way that we think about things. It's like, if I'm not making money off of this, if I'm not doing X, Y, and Z, or if it's not immediately leading to an outcome, I think sometimes we get even more anxious about that stuff. And a lot of what we're talking about here, especially the letting go and realizing you're not the center of the universe, that really comes with a lot of like, okay, wait a second, if this isn't about me, how would I do it differently? Right? If my career isn't even really about me, or if my personal brand isn't even really about me, how does it change the way I build that brand? How does it
Oh my
change the
God.
way I
Yeah.
approach my job? And
That
go ahead, jump in.
So that reminds me of Seth Godin's work, and he's really about how do you want to change the world by helping serve the people that you seek to help and change and improve their lives, and really being a linchpin at being that person that's gonna like move the needle to help other people. At the end of the day, you have your outputs and you have your outcomes, and you really want to focus on the other, helping other people, because that's really what people value and will give you money in exchange for that value. But the whole point of that is the money is used to sustain the effort to help others. And if
Right.
you help others well enough, you'll end up being successful financially. But the whole point is to make it sure that you still have a shirt on your back so you can help people tomorrow. That's the whole point. And the rest comes. So that's like the first part that I really like about what you said. And then also I think it's like an evolution of maturation, becoming mature. Like when you're an adolescent, you think the world revolves around you, and as an adult and as a parent, you focus on other people, or as a manager, you focus on other people, and it's a lot less scary. Like, I don't know, I used to be terrified on first dates, and then I realized it's like, can I just get to know another human being? Can I just see if we vibe naturally and not force it? Or like in job interviews, I had to convince people that I wasn't a fraud or that I was an expert. But could it be something else? Could it be, can I just see if I like the other person in the other organization and go back to that? Like, why are you in it in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's about reminding yourself. I learned this term NATO, not like the government NATO, but like the not attached to outcome. I learned it in an episode of Transparent on Amazon.
Cool.
So how can you have the outcome in mind because you want to do it for the reasons that you got into it? Like you wanted to get into yoga because you relaxed. So have the outcome in mind. So you're always filtering your yes or no decisions through that filter of why you're doing it, but don't be attached to the outcome. Be directed in the compass. So you're going towards your outcome, but you don't have a map that's so rigid that if you don't reach the place that you want, it's counterintuitive. You will never reach where you want if you try so hard to force it.
Right. Well, and that plays right into the job search again, right? So many people go on an interview and they're like, this is my dream job. And I'm like, stop calling it your dream job. This is a job.
Putting on a pedestal.
Right. The second you put on a pedestal, it's like, this is my dream date. It's like, oh, you're going to trip walking in the door. Yeah. You're going to like clench it so tightly, you're going to lose it. And those are the things where, in my mind, that practice of non-attachment, right? I was watching a video recently about, relationships. It's like, and so someone actually asked the question using a dog as an example. They said, I might be willing to go as far as to die for my dog. But how do I is that real love or is that like over attachment? Like, what is that? And they're like, the person who they were talking to, some spiritual guy, he goes, could you live without your dog? And the guy's like, well, I want to say no. It's like, but clearly, of course I could. And like, it's like, just because you're not attached doesn't mean you don't care and doesn't mean the thing goes away. And
that's the same with acceptance.
Exactly. It's like, just because you're not attached. And that's the pushback I always get, because I put up a post saying like, the job you're applying to probably sucks. And I got pushed and I got pushback.
I love that so much. Oh.
Well, and I got pushback on it. And I was like, but it probably does. I mean, everyone I talk to has some shit to say about a job, even ones that they liked. And there's this idea that like, if I don't believe it's going to change my life forever, if I don't believe that this is my dream job, then I won't have it. Then I won't be able to keep it. Then it'll go away. And I'm like, I had another post recently and I was like, you never had the job in the first place. It was a rental. Every job is a rental.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And these ideas, I'm like, they're helping me realize like everything is temporary. And being a contractor helped with that a lot because, I know I'm temporary everywhere I go. And so that's that when someone gets on the phone with me and it's like, we have to, wrap up this contract in 2 months, I don't get hurt by that. Whereas they're bracing for like, someone to like cry or like, they're bracing for a firing. And I go, yeah, that's cool. What do you need me to do in the meantime? And they're like totally caught off guard by it. And just because you don't need it doesn't mean you won't continue having it. And that I think is important.
I think it's even better. We think, oh, if we don't cling to it and fear its loss, then we'll lose it.
Right.
But ultimately, that is a distraction to the thing itself that you're trying to keep.
Yeah. And I mean, how many stories are there of the clingy person that ends up ruining the relationship because they're too clingy, right? And like, that's the core. Or people that are so wound up about their job that they never relax and then no one wants to be around them. And then they end up getting let go because they're creating a tense environment or something like that.
It's such a cliche that like the work world and the job hunt is like dating. However, I find it very useful as a metaphor because if you're struggling in your work life, but you're not struggling in your dating life at the same time, you can create that analogy and that metaphor where, well, what's working in my dating world that I can bring into my work world or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not going well for you now in both realms, in the past, at least one was going well at one point. And even if that's not the case, you have friends and family that have had something happen, and there's always relative levels of success.
Right.
But if you can say like, how am I needy at work? Usually people don't use the word needy at work, but like, how am I needy at work? Oh, well, let me look how I'm needy in relationships. Is there some connection? Well, how am I confident at work? Well, how am I confident in relationships? And ultimately, I'm starting a new job pretty soon, and it's in a consulting firm. So I've done consulting before, but I wanted to like refresh myself with the beginner's mind and that kind of thing. And I was like, what is consulting? How is consulting different than agency work and that kind of thing? And you know what everyone said? And I downloaded all these books from Blinkist. They're like 20-minute summaries of books. Everybody was basically like, the summary of the book is that consulting is about relationship building. And I was just like 5 authors of consulting books, like that's all they had to say basically, was like, it's about relationships. And I was like, wow, it's a good thing that I've focused on helping other people with their relationships, because my relationship to my clients are going to be more front and center
Yeah.
than if I was in an in-house position, where it's still important, but you don't have, the stakes aren't as high with an in-house position. So I actually would venture to say that it's spoken about in cliched ways, but the fundamental overlap between it is it's all relationships at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And just like you can have different kinds of love, there's different kinds of relationships, and you can love your job, but you don't, when you love your spouse, but they're the same word, but they're not the same meaning.
Yeah.
So there's something here to play with. I'd be excited to explore deeper at some point, but
For sure. Well, and that's really the thing, is figuring out what that relationship is. You know, some people are like, well, I only have, you know, I think the average is like, the average number of friends someone has is one. And
Are you
and
serious?
yeah, and then they say like the healthy average is like 3 to 5.
Wow.
But typically I think people are like, well, this person, I'm not counting them because they don't call me every week, or because this or that or
Yeah.
the other thing. And I try to keep a much broader view of all of it. It's like, it's just one giant spectrum from person I don't know to person I'm dating, and everything else is somewhere in the middle, right? And, you know, there's acquaintances, and then there's like coworkers, and then there's colleagues, and like you could have a coworker that's not a colleague, and you could have, and so on and so forth. And so I do think that a lot of this is quite interesting to look at from a relational standpoint. And of course, dating and jobs hunting are so similar, because it's dealing with people, it's managing rejection, it's
Yeah.
doing all the same similar things. And networking is so much like dating. Hopefully you're not taking it to that level, because then you start to get creepy.
Oh yeah,
But
you got a business card for dating. You're like,
yeah.
hello.
No. And so but those are the things where you start to go, like, you know, I tell someone to go network, and they think I have to go make best friends, and I'm like, no, you have to go make acquaintances. Like, go make hundreds of acquaintances. 80% of them will forget who you are, and the ones that are left over, you're solid.
That's
Like
true.
that. And I can't even count the number of people that I've networked with. And, you know, I started out as anxious as anyone, having like full-on panic attacks going on networking meetings. But like, at a certain point, you're just constantly meeting people, and the people that stick around. And that is how relationships tend to go. The problem is that
Yeah.
most people won't leave the house, and like, or won't set up the call. And that's, you know, everyone says it's hard to make friends out of college, or it's hard to make friends as an adult, or it's hard to meet people professionally. It's like, it is if you don't go to the event. It is if you don't do, you know, take the initiative. But truly, at the end of the day, the reason that is the thing that is stopping us is going back to the original point. We need to have a good enough relationship with ourselves to actually go talk to another person, right? If we're
Yeah.
totally beating ourselves up before we even get there, anything they say is going to be interpreted by us as negative, and then we won't be able to build that connection, because we have a filter that is changing the words, literally changing the words as they go through our head.
There was a book that I read 2 years ago that really transformed how I thought about networking and community building and dating and business. It's called Belong, and it's written by the woman who started Daybreakers. Do you know what Daybreakers
Yeah,
is?
yeah. What's her name again?
I can't remember without
Mickey.
looking it up.
It's one of the Agrawals.
Yeah, Agrawals. Yeah. So basically, for those who are listening or watching who don't know, Daybreakers is a weekday pre-work sober rave combined with yoga and a
Yeah,
breakfast bar. It
it's
kind of
fun.
feels like Burning Man, and it's
It's super
amazing.
fun. Yeah, I drink
And
way too much cold brew coffee at those things.
yes, I started drinking cold brew coffee because of them. So, um, you if you look at connecting to other people and connecting to yourself through the lens of this book, which is wonderfully illustrated and wonderfully written and very succinct, it helped me have a healthier attitude. And really, I think at the end of the day, all of this is about attitude and building a healthy way of relating to the feelings and thoughts that we all have, and not trying to cut them off, stop them. Because when you don't want it, you have it and it gets larger.
Mm-hmm.
When you accept it and you channel it, you can harness it for positivity, but not everything is always going to end up positively. So you're going to get your knees bruised, you're going to get your head knocked in, your teeth chipped, but you're going to get up, and it's not about getting knocked down. It's about whether you get back up again, and realizing that these things that feel like mortal wounds are really paper cuts.
Mm-hmm.
But I am one to say that, because every paper cut, my mom tells me, feels like a nuclear explosion, because I have, like you, I also have anxiety issues. And so knowing what it feels like, and it's like we're in a virtual reality, and like we're getting like shot by virtual guns, but we're behaving as if we're getting actually shot.
Right. We take off the VR mask and we're like, oh wait, there is actually no damage. That I liked what you said earlier, which was you went back to talk to people and apologize, and you realized that they, number one, didn't remember it happening, and number two, never had that opinion. And I've been, one of the best parts about going down this path and like studying these things and practicing these things is I've gone back and talked to old managers and I actually went back and I sent an email to someone who I had my worst informational interview with back in college 6 years later. And the message I wrote was, the headline was, "Thank you for the learning experience." And the body of it was, "You probably don't remember me, but I had the worst informational interview of my life with you. And I just want to say thank you. And for the learning experience." And he wrote back, he's like, "You're right. I have no idea who you are. I don't remember that happening." And it started to, one of the things that kind of hits me, because I've been in the branding world so long, I've been through the neurotic phases of it and stuff like that. I used to go to events, and my old business partner was always like, he's much more hype than I am. He's much more out there and like showy. And it's almost like he's the hype man and I'm the anti-hype man in a way. And we laugh about it, but he's like, he told me once years ago, he's like, "You're not very memorable at these events that we're going to. Like we go, we leave, like people will see us for the second time and they'll remember him, but not remember me." And I used to get so offended by that. I don't even know if I was offended. I think I just felt like I wasn't doing something right. And now I'm like, wait, that's like a superpower to be able to have a second chance at a first impression.
Oh
like,
yeah, you mentioned that before.
That's incredible. Yeah. And that to me is one of those things where, like, again, it's perspective. Like at one point I was like, oh, should I be more memorable? Should I wear a flashy coat?
Like, benefits both, because it's almost like I can picture you in a movie, Martin, where like you get all these do-overs because no one remembers. It's like you cause amnesia in people.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love it.
Like with me though, it's like with me, I'm too memorable, and you'll either love me or you'll hate me, but you won't forget. And sometimes I want people to forget, like, because I put my foot in my mouth, I did something weird or something, I don't know.
Yeah, but that, I think, again, it's how you react. It's how you react to it. Exactly, and that's what matters the most. So I know we're coming to the end here, but Mo, thanks for joining us. Where can folks find out more about you?
www.mogoltz.com. So first name and last name. And then extra UX directs to my same homepage. So those are the two places. I'm on LinkedIn. So reach out. I'm on ADP list, which is a way to find mentorship for free pro bono coaching for UX. And you can look me up on that directory as well.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope everyone goes and checks out what you're working on. I know you got some new things going on in your career coming up. And Mo, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for stopping by this episode of the Career Therapy Podcast. It's been a pleasure having you. And if you're curious about what we do here at Career Therapy, head on over to www.careertherapy.com to see all of our coaching options, resources, and links to other things we got going on. If you would like to share your story on this podcast, something that you've gone through, a transition you've experienced in your career, whether it's getting a job after college or going through a layoff or getting back into the workforce after raising your family, We would love to hear from you. Head over to linkedin.com/in/Martin McGovern and shoot me a DM. Let me know what's going on, and I'd really like to share your story with the world. What we're trying to do here is really normalize the emotional side of the job search, because we all go through it. We all have tough times in our careers, and sharing these stories really helps people feel less alone and feel more empowered to take their career back into their own hands and make something of it. So thank you again for stopping by. If you'd like to leave a like or a comment, subscribe or share, or leave us a review on iTunes, and I think maybe even Spotify, we'd really appreciate it. Best of luck to you in all of your career endeavors, and I'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.